Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel Links deck profile. Today we're taking another look at 7's Accel Road after it just got its brand new support card, that being 7's Road Sorcerer. So this deck has basically had a bit of a resurgence. We've seen this deck win a tournament and top another already. So with just the inclusion of one new card, this deck does already seem to be performing very, very well. So let's talk about the 7's Road Sorcerer. So it's a 1300 attack, 100 defense, level 4 dark spellcaster. We can send 3 face-up monsters from our field to the graveyard to special summon 1 level 7 or lower spellcaster type monster from your graveyard face up to your field. If you special summon the 7's Road Magician by this effect, you can special summon 1 7's Road Witch from your graveyard face up to your field. So basically we'll be tributing 3 monsters to get out another monster, but the card will be from our graveyard. So effectively we lose 3 cards from our hand, and if we get out a double tribute monster, effectively we've used the same amount of cards, right? Because if we were to summon out a 7's Road Magician from our hand, we would normal summon, tribute out the 7's Road Magician. If we want to summon it from the graveyard, we would normal summon, send them all to graveyard with Sorcerer's Effect, and bring back the 7's Road Magician. Now, where this gets a lot better is if we do use it on the 7's Road Magician, we can then bring back 7's Road Witch as well, which again, 7's Road Witch would be a normal summon, and then the 7's Road Witch itself, which basically, again, is like getting a +2. We basically get a discounted or a free 7's Road Witch, which is really quite good. Now, if we were to just use the 7's Road Witch effect from hand, we would still normal summon, tribute for 7's Road Witch, then the discard for 7's Road Witch, and then we would summon out the 7's Road Magician, so that would be a 4-card combo to basically get out both of these monsters. But again, if we use the 7's Road Sorcerer, we only need the 7's Road Sorcerer, 2 other monsters, send them all to the graveyard, and then bam, we get the 7's Road Witch and the 7's Road Magician. We'd even get a discount on using the 7's Road Witch effect. The only negative then would be that we would not get the boost from 7's Road Witch's effect of increasing her own attack power by 400, and if we're special summoning from the graveyard, we're also not going to be able to use 7's Accel Road. But what we could potentially do is summon out 3 monsters, including the 7's Road Sorcerer, use the effect to bring back 7's Road Magician, then bring back 7's Road Witch, and then if we have another 7's Road Magician in hand, discard a card and summon out that 7's Road Magician. That way 7's Road Witch does get that boost again, and we end on a board of a boosted Witch and 2 7's Road Magician, which is pretty good. So let's talk about the skill again. It's been a little while since we've actually talked about this skill. So 7's Accel Road. This skill can be used if the only monsters with 1400 or more attack in your deck are spellcasters, requirement none. 1 face-up monster with 1600 attack on your field that was normal summoned this turn gains 800 attack until the end of this turn. If you have activated this skill on turn 4 onwards, you can return 1 card from your hand to the deck once per duel, and if you do, add 7's Road Magician from your deck to your hand. So basically, we want to find one of our 1600 attack monsters, of which in this deck we're playing 3 copies of 7's Road Witch, 2 copies of Torna, and the 1 copy of Magician's Valkyria. So we find any of these 6 cards, we can normal summon them, basically give them an 800 boost, putting them all up to 2400 attack, and then we can also, if we want, put a card back in our deck and search out the 7's Road Magician once per duel. So the primary way we want to do this ideally is Witch, because Witch's effect can then cheat out the 7's Road Magician and give itself a big boost, and that's kind of the big wombo combo of the deck. So one other thing you might have noticed is that we have dropped the number of 7's Road Magician down to 2, and this is an innovation by Duel, who did actually win one of the Angel Cups. So the reason for going down to 2 is that we now have less bricks in the deck. We're now down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tribute monsters, which is a lot nicer than playing any more than 7, because any more than that and it really does start to get a bit bricky. But the logic behind it is we're only ever going to be searching 1 from the deck anyway with the skill, but if we can get them into the graveyard, we can just start toolboxing the graveyard a lot using our 7's Road Sorcerer. If we're effectively able to just use the 7's Accel Road 1 time on a Witch, get access to the 7's Road Magician, then both of them get into the graveyard after we've already had that 1 explosive turn. Anytime we find a 7's Road Sorcerer, we basically have our full combo again, which is really, really nice. So going through the card by card, 7's Road Magician, send them token effect to the graveyard. This card gains attack equal to the number of different attributes in your graveyard times 300 until the end of this turn. So this, once again, will incentivize us to have as many different attributes in the deck as possible, because ideally we want to see all of those attributes in the graveyard to get a maximum boost, which will boost this card's attack up to 39, and 39 is huge. Then we have Valkyria, who again has a really, really nice defense stat at 1800, and that attack stat at 1600 is perfect for 7's Accel Road. Also, it does have the continuous effect that your opponent cannot attack spellcaster monsters other than this card, which can come up quite a lot, especially if we have a 7's Road Magician on the field. A lot of the time, your opponent won't be able to defeat a 16 and then still have a way to get over that 21, so sometimes it can be extremely relevant. 7's Road Witch, again, one of the most important combo pieces of the deck and the primary starter. We want to get this card in the graveyard as soon as possible, and we want to summon it to use the 7's Accel Road to get out that 7's Road Magician. Then we have Torn of the Windweaver. This is our wind monster of choice of the deck, as well as the fact this is our way to beat set 3 pass. If our opponent is playing very defensively, obviously what we want them to do is have those monsters be in attack mode, so Torna is our best way to do that. The cost is a little bit steep, but sometimes we will brick on some of our tribute monsters, so getting them out of our hand is not always the end of the world. Then we have our 7's Road Sorcerer. We've already talked at length about this card, but it is just absolutely fantastic. The only real negative about this card in this specific list is that it's a dark, and we already have plenty of dark monsters, so it does make spreading the attributes a little bit harder. But in the future, when we do get more of the other 7's Road cards, this card will be a lot better for being dark, because when we do get some of the fusion monsters later, they do primarily want you to be on as many darks as possible. And then for our fire monster, we are playing Thunder Gazelle. Thunder Gazelle is just a really good generic card, and if we're not playing any other limit 3s anyway, we might as well play this card. 1300 attack is okay, but if your opponent has no cards in their hand, which again isn't going to come up too much, but it will come up sometimes, we can shuffle 2 monsters from our graveyard into the deck, which again, putting cards back into the deck can be good. Obviously, we still want to make sure, ideally, that we leave 7's Road Magician in there, and Witch, and one of each attribute if possible. But then, when one of our monsters attacks a defense position monster, it will inflict piercing damage, which again, this deck is very explosive. We want to be extremely aggressive. We want to try and get as much damage in as we possibly can. Thunder Gazelle is an absolutely fantastic inclusion, because even if you only get this effect off once, that can be all it takes to close the game. Then we have our brand new Rhythmical Performer. This card is really, really cool. Now, this spot could be filled with any number of water. Some people will play Mystic Dealer for that discard draw a card, which again can be really nice. Some people will play Siesta Terrero to put more shuffling back into the deck and to flip problematic monsters face down. Rhythmical Performer, I actually do think, is the best option personally. We can send the top card of our deck to the graveyard. Your opponent then sends the top card of their deck to the graveyard. Then if they send a spell trap to the graveyard, we can draw 1 card. So milling is obviously still really good for this deck. We want to get all the different attributes into the graveyard. We want to get our 7's Road Witch, and we want to get our 7's Road Magician into the graveyard anyway. But if we do get that plus, that is really, really good for us. This deck really can struggle to end on 3 monsters and have any back row. So just getting a plus in this deck is always going to be really, really good. And the fact it's water is just icing on the cake. The first player to actually use this, I believe, in this deck was Sora, but I think a lot of people had already seen this card and had decided that this was going to be a really good water card for this deck anyway. But shout out to Sora for basically being the first person to play this in a tournament. Then we have Ultimate Flag Beast Boltracorn, which is again, a really fantastic staple monster. If you can fit this card in your deck, you probably should. We have no other monsters on our field, send the card to the graveyard. 1 face down spell trap on our opponent's field cannot be activated until the end of their next turn. This card is especially good in a really, really aggressive deck like this. If you're able to turn off your opponent's buffered slime and negate attack, and then pop the other back row of Magical Stream, you just find yourself in such a good position to just get in for just an absolute ton of damage with the explosive amounts of damage this deck can do between 7's Road Witch, 7's Road Magician, and 7's Accel Road. Next up, 7's Road Mage. 7's Road Mage is a bit of a weird one. I don't dislike this card, but I do find oftentimes I have to leave this card face up on the field if I want to use its effect, which can be a little bit annoying. But it's only got 800 attack, which is not the best, and it's a dark monster. Again, we have so many darks already, we don't really want more. We can send the top card of a deck to the graveyard, and then 1 face-up, level 7 or higher monster in your opponent's field loses 400 attack until the end of this turn. Now, notably, this does work on maximums, which can be very relevant, because again, 7's Road Magician get to 39, it can't quite get to that 4,000. 7's Road Mage can reduce the attack of your opponent's Yggdrago to allow us to attack over it. But then it loses an additional number of spellcaster type monsters in our graveyard times 100 until the end of this turn if we have a face-up 7's Road Magician on our field. So again, if we want to get that secondary effect, usually we have to have this card just remain on the field at the end of the turn, which is not ideal, but it's still fine. 7's Road Mage is a really, really cool tool because we can reduce our opponent's attack by an absolute ton, which does mean we just get to attack them for an extra ton of damage. So it's just a really strong card. Then as our other light monster, we're on 1 copy of Light Sorcerer. So we've decided to go with 1 copy of Light Sorcerer, and I guess we'll jump ahead a little bit, and 1 copy of Flame Sorcerer, just because, one, mixing up the attributes I think is kind of fine, and two, when your opponent sees both a Light Sorcerer and a Flare Sorcerer, they're not necessarily going to know how many of each copy you're on, so they might see that you're playing both and think you might be on a playset of each, and then that might make them think that you're playing a more aggressive version of the deck that's going to have a lot more 1500 beaters. That's why we've decided to opt for 1 and 1. And then for our Earth monsters of choice, we've gone for Doriado. There aren't that many good, just Earth monsters in the game in general right now. This card is fine because it's got 1400 defense, and if it does get flipped into attack mode because of whatever reason, stop defense, or a Taunter of your opponents, or Hysteric Forces, it's still got 1200 attack, so we can still take the hit and not lose too many life points. For our spell cards, we're on 3 copies of Magical Stream, extraordinarily important because, again, we need to get rid of our opponent's problematic trap cards that are going to stop us from winning the game, and then just get in for a load of attack. So it's very, very important that we do manage to clear out all of our opponent's back row, or turn them off with Boltricorn. Then we're on Shield and Sword, and again, this deck is extraordinarily explosive. It's kind of like a glass cannon in that we're not very good at taking hits. Our boards that we end on are always going to be very weak, and we're expecting them to get broken every single time. So we need to get in that extra damage wherever we can, and Sword and Shield is going to be the best way to do so. A lot of boss monsters in the game have very low defense points right now. I'm thinking things like Royal Rebels, we're thinking things like Cyburst, we're thinking things like Machines, we're thinking things like Aqua. Just a lot of these cards have really low defense values. So being able to flip them over and then just get in for even more damage is always going to be extraordinarily valuable. And the same goes for Talismanic Seal Array. Being able to reduce monsters' attack, obviously this is fantastic against maximums, but it's really good against everything, especially when our entire objective is to clear out all our opponent's back row and then just blast them in the face for as much damage as physically possible. Talismanic Seal Array really does help us get all that damage in. Then we're on Negate Attack because it's almost a mandatory inclusion. Again, you can play Widespread here, and in some cases Widespread will actually be better. I personally prefer Negate Attack because sometimes a deck will just be able to come out of nowhere and just wipe you out. I'm thinking things like Royal Rebels, I'm thinking things like Magnum Overlord, so being able to use Negate Attack to stop those decks from just killing you seems like a really good idea to me. And then Buffered Slime is a basically mandatory inclusion in every deck. As long as your opponent doesn't maximum, you are basically fine to survive the turn, so it's absolutely incredible. So this deck is really good. I think realistically, this is probably one of the strongest decks right now. I don't know if I would immediately throw this into tier 1. It's at the very least like top of tier 2. This deck is performing very well right now. We'll have to see if people adapt or if people learn something about this deck and like play around it a bit better. But at the moment, it has been performing very well. After testing it myself, I will say when the deck kind of has everything fall into place, it does feel very, very strong. It can be extraordinarily dominant. It can be extraordinarily explosive. You can just win the game on the spot, and your opponent's probably sat there like, how did this happen? I'm not even sure what happened, but all my life points are gone. Other times, you can draw quite badly. If everything doesn't quite fall into place, the deck can feel a little bit underwhelming. This deck also does play 7 high-level monsters, so it's quite easy to brick. If we find all of our 7th Road Sorcerers early, that can feel pretty bad, because then we've got to find a way to get them back into the deck, either using Thunder Gazelle or using Talismanic Seal Array in order to get access to it again. Dropping down to 2 7th Road Magician, again, is really, really good if we get access to our Sorcerers. If we don't find our Sorcerers, only having 2 7th Road Magician can be a little bit of a liability, but statistically, this deck should perform more often than it shouldn't. So overall, even though my experiences have varied a little bit, I do think this is still an extraordinarily strong deck. I think, again, it's not without its faults, and it is a glass cannon for a reason, because glass can just shatter. But let's find some replays so I can show what I've been talking about.
ラッシュデュエル。ラッシュデュエル。